Madam, how can I help you?
I want to buy a house and need a $500,000 mortgage.
Let me check your credit. If you've been an obedient slave, I will decide.
What do you mean, obedient slave?
It means you have allowed yourself to be robbed by financial institutions.
After a few minutes.
Okay, I've reviewed your credit records. The property is valued at $500,000, and you have been an excellent slave. Your income qualifies, so we will lend you $500,000 under the following conditions. You must first lend us the $500,000. Then, we will be happy to convert the property asset into a means of exchange and lend it back to you at 10% annual interest. We, the bank, do not take this amount from our depositors or our own money. For various reasons, we cannot do that. We will take the money from you.
If I had $500,000, I would not be here asking for a loan. This sounds insane.
Yes, it sounds and is insane, but I will show you how you can lend us the $500,000 and then borrow it back at 10%.
This sounds like a scam.
We are licensed to scam people, and people have agreed by their ignorance, silence, and lack of opposition. Of course, with the help of corrupt politicians and the education system. Let me explain how you can lend us the $500,000. When you, as the client, sign a promissory note in favor of the bank for $500,000 plus $1 million interest, you legally create the amount of $500,000. You also create $1 million interest charges, but we receive it but don't create it. When the bank receives your signed mortgage PN, promissory note of $500,000, plus the interest amount of $1 million. The PN, it is an asset and a loan to the bank. This is why the bank's accounting entry shows a liability for the bank of $500,000, recognizing it owes the amount to the customer. Liability means we, the bank, owe you $500,000 on condition that it is repaid to the bank. To reiterate, when the bank receives your promissory note, it's a loan to the bank. The bank converts your asset into a means of exchange in dollars and makes a deposit to your account. After you sign the so-called mortgage agreement, you will find the money in your account. It's the amount you agreed to pay plus $1 million interest. Interesting, eh?
The banks also commit accounting fraud because we do not create the interest amount of $1 million or any amount for private and government loans. Because if we did create the amount of interest and spent it into circulation, it would make it possible for all the people to pay the principal and interest of the alleged loans. So, the interest amount is purposely never created to make it impossible for all the people to pay the interest charges. The people who are able to pay for their mortgage will eventually also lose their properties to pay for the government's inability to pay the so-called loans. This will make it possible for the banks to foreclose on all the people's and government's assets. To reiterate, both the people and governments will eventually be compelled into bankruptcy. It's a mathematical certainty. This is to facilitate the banks to take over all the private and public assets of the nation.
I don't comprehend one word.
Please sign here. Now, the amount is deposited in your account and transferred to your lawyer in trust to purchase your house.
I don't comprehend. Why are you telling me this?
I am an employee of this bank and also a victim of fraudulent mortgages. I wanted to clear my conscience and hope that by spreading this information, people will compel the government to address this economic cancer of charging interest. This issue affects me, my family, and friends. If this cancer isn't removed, all people and businesses will be bankrupt. The only way to remove it is for people to spread this information and compel government candidates to uphold the US and Canadian constitutions, which clearly state that money changers and bankers cannot operate privately. No contract is valid when the bank conceals material facts to mislead the client, which we do, except for what I've just told you.
If political candidates refuse to abolish the usury monetary system, make them an offer they can't refuse, you will vote for them on the condition that they obey the Constitution and prohibit privately owned corporations from pretending to lend money and charging interest. The most important part is that interest charges cannot be allowed simply because it was never created and introduced into circulation and doesn't exist. It's only possible for the principal to be paid, but impossible to pay for the interest amount. To comply with generally accepted accounting principles, any service charges must also be created. At any time, you should send letters to elected officials demanding they obey the Constitution, or you will either not vote or revoke your vote and have them charged with treason by the People's Court of Justice. please read the Supreme Court of Canada's decision and other prominent economists' opinions on banking. To reiterate, we, the money changers, do not tell you that once you have signed the promissory note for $500,000 in favor of the bank, plus the interest amount of $1 million which we don't create and it's not shown on the balance sheet, you have technically lent us $500,000. The bank commits at least 27 crimes because the true nature of the transaction is falsified. It's constructive forgery. The promissory note is converted into a means of exchange of $500,000, known as money or currency, which is deposited into your account and transferred to your lawyer in trust to purchase the house. People mistakenly believe that only paper currency and coins are money. Promises to pay are also money. Legally, only the principal amount must be repaid to the bank to remove it from the accounting system in existence. The service charges are allowed on condition that the amount is also created.
I don't understand this entire story. I'm going to speak to my lawyer about it.
Yes, you can, but the lawyer won't help you because the money controls the content of all textbooks on law, economics, and ethics. Financial institutions ensure that students, economists, lawyers, media, and government officials are unaware of our secret. We make sure that economists are not aware of the true nature of the monetary and banking system.
I will speak to a member of parliament.
It won't help because we finance all political parties with money stolen from clients. If you go to the police, lawyers, or judges, they will ignore you and declare you insane or order psychiatric treatment. The banks also owe the police. If they dare report or investigate, we will cancel their mortgage. If you or the police go to court, you'll be in for a surprise because judges won't dare decide against us, even with absolute evidence. They will ignore you because they also have mortgages and credit cards. They are all Freemasons, and we bribe them with bank directorships when they retire and provide them with gifts. The media also depends on us for mortgages, credit cards, and advertising, so you'll be wasting your time. Madam, do you want the loan or not?
Okay, it looks like I have no choice. I need a house to live in. Please answer one last question. Do you state all this information on the mortgage agreement?
Please tell as many people as possible, but don't mention that I provided this information. Keep it confidential between us, because if the owner of the bank finds out, I could lose my job. We have controlled and fooled lawyers, judges, kings, queens, dictators, prime ministers, and emperors since at least the Middle Ages. We banks have a God complex. We believe we cannot do wrong. On the mortgage contract, we state that we lend you the mortgage amount. It's all a fraud, and you agree to be part of our illegal and criminal scheme.
Do all banks operate the same way, and how long have they been able to get away with this fraud?
Yes, all banks operate the same way. We've been doing this since the Middle Ages. Since then, we've deceived everyone, including the education system, the legal system, and all European governments. Some kings gave us a hard time during the last few centuries. When they tried to stop us from charging interest, we stopped making loans, and the economy collapsed. The kings had no choice but to allow us money changers to continue our extortion racket. We operated in secret. The money powers made all the kings and queens wealthy, so they didn't complain and allowed us to continue pretending to lend money. They are no different from the existing governments, who are always in need of money. Little do they know that they could create their own so-called money interest-free. For example, from 1935 to 1974, the Canadian government borrowed any amount for public expenses interest-free from the Bank of Canada, and taxes were a fraction of current rates. We money changers have kept the queens, kings, and governments in a mental trance, believing that bankers lend money. Through the education system, we've induced a mental trance that diminishes cognitive ability. In other words, we keep people busy with cell phones and entertainment to prevent them from seeking alternatives or suspecting our fraud. We control students and the general population through the education system, making them ignorant of our crimes. They don't realize that the government can create its own interest-free money. In fact, the Bank of Canada did just that from 1935 to 1974. However, when Pierre Trudeau became Prime Minister, he stopped borrowing interest-free and began obtaining money from the World Bank at interest.
The woman thinks for a while and, having no other option, agrees to sign the promissory note. When the client signs the promissory note in favor of the bank, The bank converts the amount into computer digits and deposits it into the client's account. This amount is new money, not taken from any other account. The banks not only receive interest charges, but also sell the promissory note, which is known as derivatives rolled into bonds. In other words, banks receive payments from the promissory note in full, plus interest charges and the sale of the promissory note. The promissory note should be returned to the client once it is paid off. The sale of the promissory note is another crime. When the principal amount is paid, it is removed from the accounting system and ceases to exist. Banks profit mainly from interest charges and the sale of the promissory note. On average, banks receive about 3 times the amount of the original so-called loan without lending or risking any of their own money.
Then, to add insult to injury, the banks pretend to go bankrupt and ask for a bailout.
How does this work?
When you sign the promissory note in favor of the bank simply converts the amount of the promissory note into computer digits and deposits it into your account. This is new money created from your assets, not taken from any other account. It cannot be taken from any existing source. It must be new amount of money. Not only do banks collect interest charges, but they also sell the promissory note, which is known as derivatives rolled into bonds. In other words, banks receive the payments from the promissory note in full, and the principal amount is removed from existence.